I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You happy to be in the house of the Lord? That's good. I hope you're just as loud as we welcome our online Cornerstone family. Would you do that? We're going to travel through several scriptures tonight, so I hope you brought your Bibles. If you don't have one, we'd love to give you one, our gift to you. If you just raise your hand real high, our crew team will bring one to you. We have it in Spanish and in English. Yes. All right. Have you ever felt offended by anyone? Yeah? Has someone ever told you you offended them? Yes. Okay. Wow. We're gonna unpack this quite a bit here, but I'm going to focus more on those who offend you and how you react to that. Okay, how you deal with it. Offense is one of Satan's greatest, most insidious acts. Pastor Kevin, permission to share an analogy? No. I'm going to do it anyway. All right. So, Margie and I had some property in West Virginia quite some time ago. We had a lot of acreage out in the country, and we built 7 raised garden beds. Who has garden beds? I know quite a few of you probably do. We fought this insidious attack from raccoons. They would come in, and they would pretty much eat up everything you had, no matter what we tried. So what do? Well, you set a trap. You put something, bait of some kind, maybe cat food in it, and then the raccoon sees the bait, comes into the cage, and doesn't even know he's walking into a trap, and the gate shuts on him. He has no idea that he was in a cage until then, because he took the bait. If he didn't take the bait, he wouldn't be in a trap. Now, don't mistake a caged raccoon with those cute ones that come up on your porch and you feed them, right? When you trap a raccoon, they'd like nothing more than to bite your arm off. Literally. If you've done it, you know what I mean. That's what they look like. They can be mean little guys. And when they're caught in that trap, all they want to do is find a way out of it. It really makes them angry. And that's what Satan does when he baits you with offense. He sets up some bait in a trap for you. And what does that do when you're offended? Causes you to get angry, maybe? Upset, bitter? Maybe you want to get back to that person? And unlike that raccoon, you may be in a trap right now and you don't even know it. Like this guy. I've been in a trap before. So, I've already asked the question, how many of you have been offended in life? And I'm assuming it's everybody, but I want to do a little test. A few weeks ago, Pastor Kevin used a fill in the blank, right? It was about stress. I only have 2 of them. I got 2 of them that I want you to fill in the blank. So this is a participation thing, right? Here's the first one. That thing you said to me really hurt my feelings. Yes. I will forgive, but I won't forget. You guys have all been offended. Haven't you? I don't even need to ask. I'll bet even some of you are in a trap right now. You don't even know it. You might be so focused on the wrong that was done to you that you don't realize that Satan has set that trap and that you have taken the bait and that you're in that trap. And what happens with that? Resentment builds. Bitterness builds. Anger. You want to get back at them. That raccoon wanted to get back at me. I used to spray their tails orange and take them 2 miles away, and if they came back with an orange tail, I knew I had to take them further away. So I don't want to spray your tails, but anyway, even today, years later, you could be holding a grudge, and you're still in that trap. Some offense that somebody committed against you. And like that raccoon, you like to bite their arms off, figuratively, right? There's two categories of offended people. Here they are. Those who were treated unfairly and those who believe they were treated unfairly. But it doesn't matter. The result is the same in the way that you react to it. See, we're quick to look at somebody else who's offended us as sinning against us. But what we don't realize is that when we take offense and we harbor that in our hearts and we hang on to that, we're sinning as well. So how do you stay out of that trap? Well, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really see ourselves as who we are. And how do we do that? It's through the enlightenment of the Word. When you study the Word, you know the human condition. You know God's view of humans. That's what it means to be introspective and to see yourself as you are. And that's what's going to free you from this cage of offense that you find yourself in. And I think right now you're thinking back. Okay, I don't think of anything right now, but I think if you think far enough back, you're going to think of something that you still have, that you're hanging on to. 20 years ago, John Bevere wrote a book, and it's called The Bait of Satan. And here's what he says. He says, the focus of offended Christians is inward and introspective. We guard our rights and personal relationships carefully. Our energy is consumed with making sure no future injuries will occur. Our energy is consumed by that. If we don't risk being hurt, we can't give unconditional love. Unconditional love gives others the right to hurt us. Can you believe that? Unconditional love gives others the right to hurt us. Think about that. Because if you love like Jesus, you're going to allow others to offend you, and you're going to get to the point where you might not even notice it anymore. Jesus is a perfect example. Open your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5. 1 Corinthians 13, 5. Here's what the Bible says about love. Love's never haughty or selfish or rude. Love does not demand its own way. It's not irritable or touchy. It does not hold grudges, and it'll hardly even notice when others do it wrong. See, the Bible tells us that if we love like Jesus does, we'll hardly notice when someone does us wrong. Yet, when we are offended, we still have that temptation, don't we, to demonstrate anger to that offender, to be upset with them, to get even with them, to hold them in contempt. Yet this is not how sons and daughters of God are supposed to act. The prescription for this is right here in Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 3. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. This is what is meant by seeing ourselves in our true condition. If we're to be like Jesus, then we're to follow his example. That's what we're called to do, to be like him. Jesus never lashed out when he was offended. Peter does a really nice job of just breaking this down in just a couple of sentences in his first letter in chapter 2. It was to this that God called you. For Christ himself suffered for you and left you an example, so that you would follow his steps. He committed no sin, and no one ever heard a lie come from his lips. When he was insulted, he did not answer back with an insult. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he placed his hopes in God, the righteous judge. So today, we're going to look at an example in the Old Testament. Joseph in Genesis. The story of Joseph takes up 14 chapters in Genesis. It's the last 14 chapters. And we're going to start in chapter 37, and we're going to do verse by verse all the way through 50. Lock the doors back there, would you? No, that would be impossible. But when we go to chapter 37, when it opens up the story about Joseph, what we do is we find that there's this listing of generations of Jacob. And Joseph, we see, was the youngest. He was 17 years old, and he was out in the field tending Jacob's flock with his 11 brothers. Now, why this story? Well, I think it's because Joseph learned how to be a perfect example for us, as Jesus was, of how not to take offense and how to deal with that, even when you have a right in your own mind to do so. So are you in Genesis 37? Verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they couldn't speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Now, right away, we see that there was already resentment in the heart of his brothers. They didn't resent their father. They resented Joseph. And once Joseph shared his dream with them, they hated him even more. Well, why is that? Well, it's because Joseph was telling them, hey, you guys, you know what? You're going to bow down to me one day. And I think that's probably youthful exuberance and a bad choice to tell your 11 brothers that they're going to bow down to you. But he did. He told them that. Not the best idea. Move on down to verse 18. When they saw him from a distance and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. See, they talked about killing him and throwing him in a pit and concocting some crazy story to Jacob that some wild animal had torn him apart. Obviously, they wouldn't tell him the truth. But Reuben, one of the brothers, talked them out of killing him. So what they do, they threw him in the pit alive. And then they started thinking, and they said, maybe what we ought to do is we ought to sell him. We ought to sell him as a slave. And there were Midianites coming through the land. And so what they did was they sold their brother to the Midianites for 20 shekels, which at that time was 20 months' worth of pay. That's how much his life was worth. So they sold him. Now, because they believed Joseph offended them, they took away his birthright. They took away his inheritance. Being sold into slavery in another country meant you're going to be a slave the rest of your life. And when you marry, your wife's going to be a slave the rest of her life. And when you have kids, your kids are going to be slaves the rest of your life. As far as Jacob knew, his father, his son Joseph no longer existed. And now Joseph had every right to be offended, didn't he? Well, how did he handle that? That's what we need to learn from. Let's dive into that a little bit. So the guy who bought Joseph was an officer in Pharaoh's court. His name was Potiphar. He was the captain of the guard. And the word tells us that the Lord was with Joseph. And he served Potiphar faithfully for 10 years. He was very successful as a result of that. Potiphar made him the head of his house underneath him. It seemed that everything Joseph touched turned into gold. Potiphar made him the overseer of everything he owned. And Joseph was a good-looking dude. Well, it says he was. Potiphar's wife took a liking to him. Let's move forward to chapter 39, starting in verse 7. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused, and he said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There's no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" Well, as you read the story further, you find out that she kept hitting on Joseph. Until finally one day, when he turned her down again, as he'd done over and over again, she grabbed his garment and it ripped free of him as he ran out. Then she told her husband that Joseph had come in to lie with her and used the garment as the evidence of that. Verse 17. Then she spoke to him with these words, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us, he came in to me to make sport of me. And as I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and he fled outside. Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which he spoke to him, saying, 'This is what your slave did to me,' his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him in the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the jail." So Joseph said, "Potiphar, your wife's a big fat liar." No, he didn't. He didn't say that. That's what I would have said. Your wife's a big fat liar. But he didn't do it. So he's in prison. Now, eventually, Pharaoh has dreams. He has two dreams that all of his magicians of Egypt could not interpret what they were. And there was a cupbearer that was in prison with Joseph for a period of time, and he remembered Joseph being able to interpret his dreams. And he told Pharaoh about this. You got to talk to this Joseph guy. Well, Joseph was able to interpret the dreams, and the dream was the fact that there would be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of what? Famine. And because he interpreted the dream, he was made second in charge in all of Egypt. Became a very powerful person. So we jump forward and we see that the famine has started, and his brothers show up. His brothers are sent there by the father because they were starving and they needed grain. So they come before Joseph, who was in charge of this. Now, you can't blame Joseph for having a little fun. He had them jump through hoops. He had them do all kinds of funny things. And if you remember the end of the story, you'll be inspired what happened. We don't have time to go into that. But see, Joseph didn't know the end from the beginning. He had no idea. As far as he knew, he was never going to see his father again, or that his dream was ever going to be fulfilled, because leaving Egypt was not an option. He was the property of someone else for life. So by this time, Joseph had to be wondering where God was in all of this. God, where are you in all this? He's been sold into slavery by his brothers. He was wrongfully accused of attempting to rape Potiphar's wife. He was thrown into prison, even after he had spent 10 years being a faithful servant. In fact, he was more faithful to Potiphar than his own wife was. Now, in those days, when you were put into prison, you were there to rot. He didn't really have any hope of getting out. You might have a chance if you were an Egyptian, but not as a foreigner, not as a Hebrew. I can imagine what he was thinking in all of this, because it's stuff I would probably think of. Lord, I've always strived to do the right thing. I served my master for 10 years with nothing but honesty and integrity. In fact, I was more faithful to him than his wife was. And all I got for my trouble is this cold slab on the floor of a dungeon for a bed and shackles for jewelry. Every time I did what was right in God's eyes, the worse it got for me. Why me, God? I don't deserve this. He didn't do that. He did not take the bait. So, that's kind of how most of us would feel, though, right? It would be difficult. Isn't it easier, though, to blame someone else for your problems? Yes, it really is. I got some examples here. The pastor said something from the pulpit that offended me, so I just can't stay at this church any longer. And that's happened here. That's happened here. And we're kind of, I know we're not supposed to be prideful, but we're kind of proud of that. You know? Here's one. If it wasn't for my ex-husband, my kids and I wouldn't have all these financial problems. If it wasn't for all the gossip being spread about me here at the church, I wouldn't have lost respect in ministry. If it wasn't for the way that my parents treated me, my life would have turned out much better. If my parents had not gotten divorced, my own marriage would have been much more successful. You see, there's so many more examples that could be added to this. The common response in all of these is to blame someone else for your condition. You know, the way that you can keep from being held accountable for how you respond to these perceived offenses. Now, what if Joseph was alive today and he acted the way that most in the churches do today? In the least, he would likely be plotting what to do with his brothers. If he could get his hands on them, he would seek to take revenge by taking them out. After all, they were talking about taking him out. They wanted him killed. But that's not what Joseph did. Remember this, though. These guys, these sons of Judah, are the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. Think about that. Think about this. If he had taken them out, it would have interrupted the lineage of Jesus. Jesus was born in the house of Judah. He's the Lion of Judah. See, the devil's been trying to cut him off since the beginning, but he wasn't successful here. You see how things could progress when you take the bait? Joseph didn't. He didn't take revenge on his brothers. The bloodline of Jesus was preserved. Now, what do you think God would have done with Joseph, though, if he had had that attitude, that mindset of revenge? He'd probably leave him in prison. But Joseph never took the bait. He left it in the cage. And even though he was caged, he never blamed God or even his brothers for his predicament. Now, how do we know that? Well, let's go to Genesis chapter 50. I told you we'd get to 50. We just didn't do all the verses. Verse 20, Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. So therefore, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Pretty amazing, isn't it? If you let him, Satan will trap you in that cage. And one of those traps is baited with offense. Others are baited with things like pride, stress, bitterness, anger. Joseph didn't take the bait of offense. He left it in the cage. So we look at this story and see that it was his brothers that sold him off into captivity. However, was it his brothers or was it God? We know what Joseph believed, because when we go to Genesis 45, starting in verse 5, this is what he says. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. He recognized God sent him there. Let's go to the book of Psalms real quick. You don't have to turn there. I'll just read this real quick. Psalms 105, 2 verses, starting in verse 16. He called for a famine upon the land. He broke the whole staff of bread. He sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. So here we see in Psalms, it was God that sent Joseph to Egypt. God had a plan for his life, and he has one for you. No one, not even Satan, can thwart that plan. And if you'll grab hold of this truth, you will operate and walk in freedom. Don't let your past cause you to become bitter. Don't allow Satan to fill you up with a desire for revenge against those who you think have wronged you. You're the only one who can take yourself out of God's will. Only you. Whether that offense is real or it's perceived. Do you struggle to feel God's presence times? Do you struggle to feel his presence in your life? It could be that you're holding on to something. holding on to some kind of unforgiveness because you've been offended by somebody. You realize that Jesus means it when we are to forgive not 7 times, but 70 times 7? You believe that? What he's telling us is we need to be like him. We need to love like him. What's the saying in the Word? If someone slaps you in the face, give him your other cheek. That has nothing to do with fighting. It has everything to do with being able to take insults and offenses. Here's what else he said. He said, if you forgive others when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sin, your Father will not forgive you. That's pretty rough, isn't it? Think about that. Now you'll say, yes, I've been wronged, but I've forgiven that person. Have you? Or do you believe they still have a debt that they owe you? Have you forgiven them? Because that's the sin nature in man is that, oh yeah, I can forgive, but what? I can't forget. We feel that a debt needs to be owed to us because we've been wronged. That's not forgiveness. What I just quoted to you comes out of Matthew, by the way, chapter 6. What I'd like to do right now is pray for you. And after prayer, I want to open up the altar for anyone who feels as though there's something they need to let go of. There's someone they need to forgive. There's someone I'm holding a grudge against. And maybe you don't even know it. At the beginning of the message, I asked how many people have been offended. All of you have been. I have been. Tonight's the night. Today's the day to exercise true forgiveness. So let's